almost the end. Today we're going to talk about designing your own analog space mission. It's the course before last. I hope you've learned a lot so far, and today is more of a recap or making you think. You're about to design your own analog space mission. You're going to get into it. You're going to be looking at a lot of aspects. Hopefully you will still have a lot to do. That's actually the fun part. But how are you going to go about it? What I'm going to tell you today is just one way of designing your mission as the way I would go about it, but it's not necessarily the way to go about it. Everybody is different, everybody has different capabilities and also has different contacts. Okay, you might have already some money, or you might already have the right media contact, so some things will be easier than others depending on where you're located in the world, what kind of background you have and what kind of team you have. You might be starting that project completely alone, or you might already have 20 volunteers just ready to get cracking. Okay, but the advice that I give is general, but should still be able to make you think. Have you got your checklist with you? What things might you have forget to think about or looked into? Okay, so we're going to go through about 11 steps. Might be some more to add, but these are quite general. Okay, you're going to have to go in depth even more. I'm going to go a little bit about it in the content, but we're going to start with first defining a goal, vision, mission, then designing a target crew and research. And once you have that crew size and kind of research idea, then we're going to decide on habitat, location and habitat. Then decide on the MCC location vis-a-vis of this habitat. So you might have your habitat here, and maybe you want your MCC here, or maybe you want it here, you want it the other side of the world, and how you're going to adapt with that, for example. Then you need to prepare financing and logistics. So once you have the location, you can start thinking, okay, well, how are we going to get everything there, and what are we going to need to get there? Then you need to prepare both the astronaut recruitment and training. Obviously, they're going to need a certain background, and you might want to filter your crew. You might not be willing to accept anyone just for your mission. You might want to do some pre-filtering, in which case you need to do recruitment, and therefore you need to make an advertisement for that. Same thing for experiments. You might want to devise criteria for the experiments. Obviously, if you've got a 2-week mission, you don't want a 6 months long experiment, or you want that experiment to be continued in a series of missions that you might be leading. But if your mission is a one-off, then you won't have that occasion. Then it's deciding on, do you want spacesuits and EVAs, and how is one going to impact the other? Okay. Then selecting and preparing the mission control center crew, making the media communication plan, and then making a qualifying critical design review. So we go into all of these steps together. So first, your mission. What is it about? How is it different from other analog space mission? If I'm now going to be your sponsor, you need to come to me and you need to say, my analog space mission is going to be like this. For example, all female crew, all parastronaut crew, or a crew of students between 12 and 14. Why? Because we want to test on that kind of person. Okay, we haven't had statistical data on that group of people. Or you could say, I want my mission to be fully focused on how the crew interacts with life support systems. I want my analog space mission to be in a location that's never been done before inside a volcano. Okay, that kind of thing. So think about, why is it different from the others? Why do you want this specifically? What kind of target crew you want? What kind of experiments do you want? Do you want, for example, all your mission to be focused on life science experiments? There's going to be complications that go with it, but we'll talk about it a bit later. Okay, what's the duration? Is the duration different? Or is it the location? Is it the crew? What is really your main focus? Okay, are you going to have plenty of EVAs, or maybe not? Because the EVAs, for example, are going to impact where the location is. And then what level of fidelity do you want it to be? Do you want to say, well, I can do an analog space mission with $500, and all I had to do was to tape up my windows and my flat, buy for $500 worth of food and toilet paper, and just lock myself in? And that's the way to do it. That's the way to do it. You just have to be quite scientific about it and just go for it and say, what are the kind of experience you're leading in this? How is it different from other stuff? What is the kind of data that you can get out of this? Okay, so really think, have a look at the different analog missions that already exist, how difficult it could be potentially for you. You should still aim high, you should try to go above and beyond. An analog space mission is a wonderful task and it's a difficult one, so it's worth going the extra mile to do it right, okay? But really think about this. The rest of your mission depends on this, on what is your goal and how it differs from other missions. Once you have this, we think about the target crew and research, okay? So you had already the general goal, which was maybe life science or experiments or crew. Now you think about your crew, because what is your crew going to be impacted? For example, if you have, you want astronauts to be under 18, that's going to actually impact a lot of things. For example, entrances, you're going to need the parents' consent, you're going to need to, for example, not have them train too far away from emergencies and stuff like this, because obviously it's a different kind of responsibility, okay? And then what kind of experiments do you want? Do you want only experiments on life science, or do you want only experiences on engineering or robotics? Okay, so again, you had the initial goal and the initial vision. Now you start to go in depth, okay? Age, diversity, what kind of experiments, how long, how diverse. Also, is your crew professionals, or is it students, journalists, children? Okay, it will change, it will impact the quality of your mission, it will impact the way you have to deal with logistics, entrances, finances, and media. Okay, so already think about this. You can have saying, well, anyone above 18 plus, but then if it's anyone, some people will have very, very different skills, which then will impact your training. Okay, so you got your target crew, you got your research ideas. Okay, now let's talk about the habitat and location. So you got your mission goal. If your mission goal is to have lots of EVAs with a crew of children, you're not going to do that in the Arctic or in a desert. It's very dangerous, going to be quite difficult. Okay, so you might want to maybe do EVA, for example, in a sandbox. It can be a very big sandbox, but you might want to make them do that in a sandbox, not too far from the city, so it's accessible, it's easy to save them if anything happens, okay? And the other thing that you've normally decided is your crew size. Did you want it to be the biggest analog space mission in the world, or did you want it to be the smallest analog space mission in the world, with one person staying for 300 days in a box? The duration and the crew size or crew number will impact the habitat size. Obviously, the longer the mission is, the more you need storage, the more you need provision, or you're going to need some refueling, which then impacts the logistics, okay? So you have to think, okay, my astronauts are staying 2 weeks, it's 6 of them, 8 of them, 18 of them, 1 of them. Changes already ratio, okay? Changes the storage that you need. The longer the astronauts stay, they also need more privacy. Okay, they're going to get more tired, they're going to maybe run into conflicts, at least the probability that they do run into conflicts will increase, because it's normal, I mean, more exposure time, okay? So you have to think that you need to prepare in the habitat some rooms where they can be alone or chill, like a living room, a relaxed quarter, okay? So you need to think about that. Then you have to think also like the costs and logistics of your habitat location. If you have to go there by helicopter, the costs are going to be much, much, much higher. If it's just renting a habitat, well, some habitat can be very, very costly, and others are just a bunker that nobody uses, and you can probably get it for free. Okay, so this location will really depend on your goal, but also what kind of budget you want and your crew size. You're not going to fit your crew in a 10 square meter box if it's 6 or 7 of them. 3 is probably the limit that you want, okay? So you have to really think about that. And then you have to think about the travel time to a hospital. If your base is, say, like 1-2 hours away from a hospital, you're going to need some medical doctors, you're going to need to have very, very well-trained astronauts in case. Most analog space mission, the closest by ambulance is about 25 minutes, half an hour reachable. Obviously, you can always call a helicopter to save you, but it still changes the way you will think about that kind of logistic if you have a habitat that's quite remote, okay? And then communication. Do you have network? If you don't have network, how are you going to implement communication? Okay, you will need to have communication in case the astronauts run into a problem, in case one of them trips, falls, and gets really, really hurt. And again, you need to bring them to the hospital. If there's absolutely no network, you need to try and install maybe an antenna. See if you got, for example, Starlink contact and how often, that kind of thing. Okay, you really have to be careful and check all of these. The best is that you first get an idea of, for example, your mission. So you said, okay, I want something extreme environment. Okay, so you're far away, remote. Okay, but you want it cold, warm, humid, one of the three. Then it already gives you a few countries that could fit the profile. Then you see, okay, how far would the habitat be? Does the habitat already exist? And then you go there and you visit a few bases if you can, or do talk to locals who are used to the bases and the conditions, and then you can already have an idea. And you should also inform yourself on stuff like just general weather, okay? Look at the weather reports for the last 5 years. If, for example, the weather is extreme only 2 days per year, it's not really interesting. If it's extreme all whole year, but to the point that you can't install anything where it's actually dangerous just to get out, it's not good either. You need to find a right balance. Okay, and then you have to think about the habitat type in terms of architecture and life support system. If your focus is on life support systems, you might not have the budget left to actually go in a very remote location. What you might want to do is to work on the life support systems and have, for example, those modules with an airlock and, you know, the compression phases and stuff like this. But you don't need per se to do that in the Arctic or Antarctica or in the desert, okay? You could be doing that in a bunker somewhere, right? It would still be quite a dangerous mission. It would still be a lot of work, but it would be actually quite interesting. So you look at this and look at the architecture. If you might want to have some space architects who are interested in testing a new design, and in which case you might again spend money more on the architecture itself than the location or the logistics of the location. So have a look into that. Now, the mission control's location vis-a-vis of the base. So how far do you want the MCC to be? Do you want them to be there in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes? Do you feel that you would be tempted to come on site if you were in the MCC, if you were that close? Or are you happy with your MCC being, for example, in another country? That's also a possibility. If it's indeed the case, or it's like far away from a hospital, what you might want is a ground operation support team, like, for example, the Austrian Space Forum has. Okay, so a team of people who are next to the habitat and are there in case anything happens, as the MCC is actually much further away. Okay, and then think your MCC doesn't need to be remote per se. Your MCC actually would be quite interesting to visit for journalists because they wouldn't be disturbing the astronaut per se, but they would get to see them via the cameras that the MCC has in the base. They could talk to flight director, to any people in there and actually get some interesting information during the mission. And at the end, astronauts come back to the mission control center, so the media can also visit them there. So having a base that's easily accessible by journalists is actually quite an advantage. And also for families, sometimes they can also go there and see their loved ones. Okay. Again, do you have a stable communication? If you have good communication in your base, but you don't have it in mission control center, then it can be pretty useless. So make sure you've got a good connection, not only to the base, but also to any PIs, good Wi-Fi, also just entertainment. So MCC can also have some, you know, downtime, watching whatever streaming devices they like. And think also about the prices of the place you're gonna have. Renting can obviously be quite expensive, so you're not going to be using a 5-star hotel for your MCC. Well, if you do, well, congratulations on your budget and your financing. But you have to also take that in mind. You can, you know, lots of people would be happy just having bunk beds and sleeping there for a month or 2 weeks. If you're staying there for 6 months, it's going to be a bit different, but it also depends on how much you're planning on spending in there. So have a look with your MCC. Also, sometimes when you plan the whole logistics, you might be using MCC to store some components. So having it not too far from the base can be quite useful, because when you're preparing the base, you can just go back and forth from the base and MCC. Now, preparing financing and logistics of your mission, that is the, how you say, very important part. That also is quite tedious. So you have to think, and what you should do is split your teams in work packages. One is responsible for the astronauts, one's for the experiments, one is for the logistics, one's for the media. You can add some more, but like split already your teams once you already start gathering, you know, people who are enthusiastic into those work packages. And in the logistic team, you're going to need people to do all of the following, which is organizing the transport to base and MCC and back. Okay, so you're going to need to transport the astronauts, but you're also going to need to transport the equipment. You might want a mission control center to have a look inside the base to see where would you put the camera, etc, etc. So you need transport. Most people don't have a minivan or a huge bus to transport things, so you're going to have to find one. You need to organize all the kitchen, food and tools inventory for the astronauts for the whole weeks or months they're going to be there. You can use, obviously, personal, you know, coach, trainer that can devise the food or the menu, but you still need to be doing the inventory. That's not their job. Their job is just to calculate how many calories, protein, carbohydrates and fibers the astronauts need, but then the rest is your job. Okay, so you go to Co-op, you go to whatever shopping center and you get the food for the whole weeks and months of training, and you etiquette all of them and you create inventory. You do the same with plates, cutlery, glasses, etc, etc. Okay, so you got that for the food. You do the same with the electronics, and in that case the electronics need to be ready for both astronauts and MCC, and that's computers, walkie-talkies, a satellite phone, headsets and all the backups that you need. Very, very important. As mentioned, communication is just paramount. You need that stable communication, but you also need the equipment. It doesn't need to be the most powerful computer, it doesn't need to be the HD camera, but it needs to be good enough that it's going to last the whole mission and that you have backups. Okay, this needs to be ready before the mission and tested, and all the programs need to be installed. So you need somebody responsible for that too. Mission control center, if they need extra food, normally they're not that far from a shopping center, things like this. They tend not to be very, very isolated, so you don't have the same problem with food as the astronauts have. So focus on getting the electronics right and all the communication thing done. Obviously, if you can plan the food before, it's great, and prepare also the sleeping arrangements for MCC. You can't have your MCC just not finding out where they sleep at all. Okay, you need to find a place for them to crash. You need to find a place for them that's comfortable, where they can also do shifts, because the Mission Control Center is looking at the astronauts whole day and whole night. So they need to be doing shifts, so you need to arrange different rooms that have different times, so they don't wake each other up all the time. Okay. Then you need to do the inventory for the experiment tools. Okay, so you will talk to, for example, the experiments team, and they will come out and say, well, these are all the experiments that we selected. We need all of these tools. Some of them, for example, some experiments will have redundancy and the tools that they need. So it's also your job to check that. Do you want 2 different ones, or do you want the same? Can you reuse them? Think also about backups, because during transport or during the mission, some of these might break. Okay, they will maybe fall down. One astronaut will just, you know, smash it, and then you're going to need some backup. And this is something you can't bring to the astronaut, but at least it would be like refueling mid-mission. If you have a short mission, honestly, it would just break the simulation. So think about what inventory you need, how you're going to bring it. Also make sure, if, for example, it's being lent by a university, which is often the case because equipment for lab experiments is actually usually expensive, do think to really write down a name. So anything, every kitchen tools and food and electronics and experiment tools and even hygiene stuff, always put a number on it, a reference number. Try to split it between electronics, experiment, hygiene, etc. so that it's easier to find in the inventory. But really make sure that you've got a label for each of your tools, and it makes it easier for the astronauts, it makes it easier for you and then the MCC doing the mission to find the tool quicker. And then you have to do the same for the facilities in the base. So when you get in the base, you have to know, okay, how many astronauts have I got in there, and where they're going to sleep? How are they going to sleep? Do you need some specific protection? Where's the storage area? Do they have beds like this? Do they have enough bed sheets? Do they have a sleeping bag? And you can also tell them, you know, you're going to need to bring a sleeping bag or a pillow or whatever it is. But you have to know what you have as sleeping equipment, sport equipment, rest quarters, hygiene, and what the astronauts need to bring on themselves. One comment I would like to give is if you have any specific hygiene products, like for example dry shampoo or dry toothpaste, these do not always work. So it's good if you ask the astronaut to test them before, test different versions, and then it can give you feedback and say, actually this one doesn't really work well, is there another option, and they can test it. If you do that long before the mission, then it's very, very helpful, because it means that you're not going to get a negative feedback from the astronauts, or they're not going to be frustrated. It's obviously going the extra mile. You can also test it yourself, but usually you'll be just busy with doing all the equipment, okay? But have a look into that, test it if you can, or ask for the advice of other people who are going to be using it, because it's an easy way to make sure everything goes well. And during my mission, the dry toothpaste was just absolutely not working. So luckily I had my own toothpaste, but I was not happy that I had to resort to that, because I had to swallow the toothpaste, which is not something you're supposed to do. But it's, again, we hadn't tested it before, we hadn't had time, and we were not on site, so it's just the way it had to go. But it's something that you can, you know, look into, and then you can give a feedback for the next mission, and then it just improves every time. And then you have to think about the installation of all the equipment in the base, okay? So you have some bases are already pretty much ready, you know, and others, if for example you're changing the mission every year, then you need to install maybe some new bunk beds, or you need to install some sports equipment. How are you going to bring them there? For example, if you've got a rowing machine, how are you going to transport it there? You know, is it easy? Is it flat? Is it can I bring a car, or am I going to have to climb through a cave? Okay, so you have to think about that. Once you've split all your teams in logistics, media, experiment, and astronauts, you can start thinking about daily budget. Okay. Obviously the logistics, depending a lot on, for example, you know, how far the base is. So it's usually transport's going to be very expensive, and for the experiments it can be simply, okay, well, we got all of this bits just being lent, you know, and then logistics, they just have to check that everything is fine, but if they were to break something, then they would have to reimburse, but otherwise it's more lent by a different laboratory and then given to logistics. So it's the experiment package that might be paying for a specific tool. Okay, the astronauts' work package can be very expensive, depending what kind of training you want them to do. It can go very, very high up, but it's also very important that you give them proper training. So it's an investment that is worth it. And the habitat also can be a very, very expensive part. So that's part also of logistics. When you have found a habitat, is you're going to have to pay your rent or build something, and that's going to take quite a bit of your money. The media one is quite different. So on the media side, usually that's how you get the money. You can obviously ask for the astronauts to pay for the mission, but usually the money that they invest in is kind of paying rent and for the food and the mission patches and the organization. Okay, having sponsors can make it very, very useful. So for example, you can ask the astronauts to pay 1 to 6K, but you can also ask maybe sponsors to pay 5,000, 10,000 for the astronauts to use those products, and they will be then seen. But then the media team is responsible to make sure that the team sees this, that the TV will film that logo of that sponsor doing the mission that will be represented later. Okay, so the media team can be extremely important to make sure that the mission takes place at all, because you're going to need money, and the media is going to be the way you get most of the money. To get those finances, obviously you need to prepare a sponsoring package. This is something that we discussed before, obviously, but that's something also you're going to need people who are responsible to do that sponsoring package, and then have this media strategy. You know, when are you going to be there, what kind of TV station you're going to contact, how you're going to crowdfund, etc., etc. Okay. So to prepare the astronaut training and recruitment plan, as mentioned, that can be quite expensive, but it really depends on what are your expectations for your astronauts. For example, they're going to be working underwater, and they're going to be in an underwater base, in which case you need to have divers, or usually you're going to have to train them to be divers. That can make things quite expensive. Okay. Also, you need to know, are they going to be para-astronauts? Is the crew going to be male only, female only, mixed? What kind of expectations do you simply have from them? And that's going to change your recruitment plan. Obviously, if you want a female only crew, you're not going to ask for males to apply. and vice versa. Okay, so you have to think about first what's your target crew, and then once you have that, then you can make the call. This you can use the media team saying, okay, we have a call for Analogue astronauts, this is the mission, this is what we expect. Your recruitment can be obviously in one phase or 4 phases. It depends really how talented you want your astronauts to be, also how much, you know, applicants you have. If you have 5 applicants, then you might not be as, you know, picky as you'd like to. If you've got 200 of them, you're going to need to find a way to demark themselves. Okay, you might want to ask them, for example, to have a blank criminal record or to speak different languages. If you want, for example, a completely Spanish only speaking team, then they're going to obviously have to speak Spanish. But if it's an international crew, most likely they're going to be speaking English. So you're going to ask them to have a certain level of English. So you have to think again, what is the goal of your mission? Is your mission the first one that is only in French, only in Spanish, only in Chinese? Okay, that's already going to put one criteria. Okay, and then other things, for example, are they going to be doing lots of EVAs? Are they going to be doing this tough physical work? If yes, then you need Analogue astronauts that are actually quite in shape. You can do some medical tests and you can do some sports tests. Okay, so these are all the parameters that can influence this. And once you thought of those recruitment, it's because you already have your mission in mind. You already know where the habitat is going to be, what kind of habitat it's going to be, what is the mission goal, what are the kind of experiments. So because you have an idea of this, you can already think, okay, well, we know what we're going to recruit, and then we know also where we might need to train them. Things that you always need to train them in is team psychology and leadership training. Even if they've been in the military for 20 years or they work with teams for 20 years, you still need this, and you need to do also team building training. Okay, they need to get to know each other. Then you need to do experiment and EVA training. You need to teach them how to use the experiment. If you don't do it before, then it's likely they're going to mess up the experiment because they've got a very tight flight plan and they might be stressed, they might be a bit tired. So you need to do this training before to make sure that they understood everything and they can provide good results. The EVA, it's about learning how to put the spacesuits, how to communicate correctly. It's also a question of health and safety. So you need to do that training. Obviously, if they don't do any EVAs, you can discard this. But obviously, majority of Analogue missions have EVAs. Communication and media training. By communication, obviously, I'm talking about communication by radio communication with MCC and doing EVAs with the astronauts in the base. Make sure that they've understood how to talk correctly to people, how to transmit the message correctly. But in my face, it's base engineering, base repair. It's not always necessary, but I think it's very important, at least that they have some skills. If they do not know how to use a hammer or a screwdriver or understand a simple electric system, it's going to be complicated. Okay, so you can either do a general course on that, on plumbing and electronics, or you could simply show them the base and get them cracking with the base. You know, have them, you know, check that everything is working, try to get something to repair, and that then can help. And you can have as a bonus the dress rehearsal. Usually it's quite important, but it's a good way to test both the team dynamics, the communication, the experiment training, and just the skills in base engineering. Okay, it can be like a day, it can be 48 hours, can be 2 weeks, whatever you want, if your mission is 6 months, for example. But it's a very good training, and that's actually going to take quite a lot of resources. For the dress rehearsal, you can't just be telling your astronauts, oh, you're going to be on Zoom and just talking to a psychologist for a while. No, okay, you need them to be on site and to do the training, and you need Mission Control Center to also be present to do that. So the resources you need to invest for dress rehearsals are higher, and that's obviously going to impact your costs, but it is worth it. For the experiments, obviously the experiment that you will choose depend on the mission duration. As mentioned before, if your mission is 6 months long, the experiments you can do are much more valuable than if it's only 2 weeks. The 6 month mission, you could do, I don't know how many missions of 2 weeks, or you could do an experiment of 6 months, or 3 months, or I don't know, twice 3 months, whatever it is. So you've got already a difference depending on that duration. And then you can also think, okay, what kind of experiments do I want? Do I want to have stuff in engineering, in psychology, in life sciences, in chemistry? that kind of thing. And if you have this diversity, it means you need to train your astronauts in a much broader array of experiments, which can be a bit more difficult, because you could think, well, you know, if you have only experiments in engineering, then the training is often redundant. Obviously, there's going to be some specificities for the experiment, but in general, there will still be some stuff that they can use from one training to the other. However, that also means they might get more bored, and you don't want a bored crew, okay? So it's good for them to have different experiments, usually the people who have a very wide range of interests, and also the crew tends to be quite mixed in background. So having a variety of experiments is useful. And the other thing is, for example, if you were to take mostly life science experiments with testing on the astronauts, you have the problem of ethical committees. Ethical committees are particularly difficult to deal with, which is good in a way. You don't want to be performing any experiments that shouldn't be performed, that are illegal, that could put at risk the astronauts and make them uncomfortable. Well, uncomfortable. We make them uncomfortable in space mission, but not. They agree to that. Some experiments might just be actually extremely bad, okay? So you don't want that. It needs to be approved. Sometimes it needs to be approved by the university, and then the country, and then another organism that might sponsor it, and every time it takes a lot of time. So if you were to have only experiments that are like this, you might end up with no experiment at all. It's often the case that the process to get that ethical approval is so long that you wouldn't be even like done with it, you know, like it would just you wouldn't get the experiment at all. It's just you have to put it out at the last minute because the day before this just hasn't gone through. Okay. Once you have this idea of experiments, you make your call. You have to clearly state the mission duration. What's the astronaut average, for example, age and background? For example, are they high school students? Are they university students? Are they all professionals? I don't know, retired people, you don't know. Just basically give an idea of the background, what they might be able to do. For example, if it's something very physical, you obviously don't want people who might have, you know, who are over 80 years old. I mean, maybe they can be extremely talented, obviously, but you might be putting them more at risk, okay? And the same with children, for example, you don't want them to be doing some very heavy lifting. You don't want them to get any sort of damage, or at least nothing that they wouldn't accept to do. Okay, so you have to give the background of the astronauts, and then you have to also say what's the possible outcome. For example, is there any chances of publication, and the IP is the kind of thing that you also have to discuss. And then you submit a research proposal, for example, or an abstract, and then you see is it in the interest of the mission. Obviously, if the experiment is like which chewing gum does an astronaut prefer in an analogous space mission, it might not qualify as much as testing of a rover on, you know, simulated Martian soil. It can still go through, you know, but there might be a priority because the Martian rover is stuff that we really use right now. We always need more data, whereas the chewing gum, well, we're not there right now, and the chewing gum is more like something that is a bonus. It's not a necessity, okay? But who knows? Maybe we get some super chewing gum. So you've decided now where your location is, what your habitat type is, if you wanted astronauts that could perform EVAs. So now you have to think, okay, EVAs and spacesuits. How many EVAs will I want to have? What kind of spacesuits? If obviously your habitat is in the very, very cold area, your spacesuit needs to be warm. And if it's going to be used in the desert, then it needs to be cold. Or it could be used in both. But in that case, you're going to need a heating and cooling system, and that's going to impact massively your spacesuits. Just a warning, spacesuits can become quite expensive, especially if you try to put life support systems in them, telemetry and things like this. So make them more realistic, it gets quite expensive. So the budget you're going to invest in them can rise quite up. But they're very interesting in the way that they allow the astronauts to get outside of the habitat while keeping a certain simulation aspect to the mission. Okay, so it helps in keeping them inside this field that they are in another planetary body. And also the impact on the media. The spacesuit is kind of the thing that allows Analogue space mission to look like space missions. Okay, being in a habitat, people could say, oh, well, you know, you're in prison or you're in a submarine, okay? The spacesuit is this extra difference that the media sees it and they understand space. And we are media dependent. That's the problem, okay, for financements and things like this. So it's worth investing in a spacesuit that looks like a spacesuit, okay. The other thing you have to be very careful with is EVAs are the situation where it's going to be the most dangerous for astronauts, because they might trip, fall, and, for example, hurt themselves or damage the equipment. So you have to check the area at the base, make sure you've got all your emergency teams ready, and that your astronauts are ready to do that. Also try to get spacesuit that gives some form of protection. Obviously, most spacesuits have a helmet on them, so it protects you when you fall from any, problem to your head. But obviously, just think about that. Think about also the gloves. For example, most gloves in real spacesuits are very difficult to manipulate. Okay, you really have some almost mittens of that feel. Okay, so you can reproduce that, but also think that it's going to change the way they're going to be able to perform some tasks. So if the safety depends on dexterity, then you have a certain problem. You're gonna need to find a way to overcome that. But the spacesuit is a very big and how to say, costly and time-consuming part of the space mission. So think about it, and think about it well. Like, don't invest all the budget of the mission in it. Well, you could, but you don't need to. But just know that it's going to take a toll if you do that. That you're gonna have to cut back on some other aspects of the mission that you might not want to. Then select and prepare the mission control center crew. Why don't you do that right away? Because you don't need to. Obviously, the astronauts, they have to fit a certain profile in general. They have to be usually both physically fine and mentally fine and extremely motivated, usually have a background in sciences so they can perform experiments. Okay, so they already have to fit a certain profile. Mission Control Center, it's more people who are organized, who are good at communication, but not necessarily just with the media, just they're clear in communication and they just calm under pressure. But it's not the kind of pressure where they're going to be running and lifting, 15 kilos while wearing a 50-kilo spacesuit. Okay, it's not that kind of calm. It's more like, well, they have to calm down others and they have to follow procedure, and that's it. So you have to think first, who's going to be the flight director? Who will be taking that responsibility? Because that's obviously a big responsibility. And then you have to think, who's the flight plan? Who's the kind of person who's organized and who has the overview and is good and quick at communicating and making changes, and then getting them to flight director for approval? Do you have a medical officer? Do you have a trained medical personnel? And do you have extra medical personnel that can be on call? Who will be the Capcom? Normally the Capcom is an astronaut that trained with the other astronauts, but who's staying on Earth, okay? They have to be friendly, they have to be calm, they have to have gone through all the trainings. Then find a motivated crew, and you need to have at least two backups of each. Why? Because you've got usually 3 shifts, hopefully for you, I hope, maybe even more. So you need to have all of these people who know how to do this, who've trained, so like 3 flight directors, 3 flight plans, 3 Capcoms, etc, etc. You can make a mission control center interview. Just look for people who are calm under pressure, team players, very motivated, and teach them, if they don't already know, how to use clear and concise communication that is under the protocol of communication for analog space missions. Then you make your media communication plan, okay? So you will need outreach for both the recruitment staff and astronauts. So you're going to need to recruit your astronauts. You're not going to just pick from your friends, or hopefully not. So you're going to have to start talking about this, and you need to make this kind of communication plan, as in when, how, on what. So build a website, use social media, and one thing that is very helpful is to reach out to advisors, because they help you with the quality of your mission, because they can tell you, well, actually this is something that we do on an analog space mission, this is something that we do in space mission, this is not something that we should do, or you could try that, or this is wrong. But also the advisors that you usually reach out to are people who are quite high ranked, quite famous. For example, if you were to talk to an astronaut, so for example, Artemis mission had Claude Nicollet as an advisor, had Albert Michon, who's a French explorer, Professor Bernard Font, who was working at ESA. So these advisors, they have knowledge of space missions, or they've been to space, or they've done exploration, so they've been doing preparation for this extreme environment. So they have this kind of knowledge that is then useful, and then you can also bounce back on their fame, kind of, not completely, but the fact that you associate your mission with these people means that you have more weight, you're actually more serious, you show that you're trying to do a proper job and that you're being backed up by somebody who's done a great job in their life. Okay, so advisors are extremely useful, both from an outreach point but also from a quality of your mission. Then once you have already your website ready, your social media, you know what you're doing, and you've got some advisors, you contact journalists, TV reporters, you explain clearly what you're doing. A lot of journalists and TV reporters, etc., do not understand what analog space missions are. They tend to think, oh, these are astronauts, and you can tell them as many times as you want and they still don't get it. So you're going to have to learn how to do this media outreach. I would strongly suggest that you also get people trained in public speaking, not just for the astronauts, but actually for people from, for example, the MCC. You're going to have this kind of training because the journalists might interview them, and learn how to explain that clearly, you know. And don't give them necessarily the location of the base. Why? Because you might get some visits that you do not want for your astronauts. If your astronauts are trying to feel isolated on the moon and Mars, and somebody comes and knocks on the door, then it's going to break the simulation, which is not something that you want. Okay. Then diversify the medium of your media communication. You can make a podcast, you can make photos, you can make videos, you can make blog posts. Prepare really those different types of things when you want them, and also warn the astronauts that you want that. Okay, tell them 2 o'clock on day 2 of the mission, you're going to have a phone call with the president of the country on this. On the Wednesday, you're going to write a blog post for this. On the Thursday, you're going to be doing a podcast with your friends inside the base. Whatever it is, make sure you give them a straight plan, that they know, for example, in which language it needs to be done, how long it needs to be, define everything, and really try to diversify, because some people prefer photos, some people prefer reading, some people prefer listening to. By diversifying, you actually reach out to more people. And then if you have any sponsors, as mentioned before in financing, make sure that you've got images of this, you know, that you can see their name, that you can see it in some media, because if they paid for it and they don't see themselves in the photos, they're not going to be very happy. And then finally, make what we call a critical and qualifying design review. There's obviously different kinds of reviews. These are two that are used for analog space missions. What are they? Basically, the critical design review, it's like it presents the final designs with almost like completed analysis, simulations, test results. For example, you've already done a dress rehearsal, and you've got almost the final picture. You're just waiting for this CDR to get information from your advisors, from your sponsors, from people attending. You will be asking questions. They'll be saying, okay, this needs to be changed, this needs to be improved, etc., etc., and then you implement those changes, and then you're good to go. Okay, and once you've done that, you need to do the qualifying design review, where you fulfill all expectations. So you got the money, you've got the contract signed, you've got all the experiments down, and you're ready to go. Basically, it's just the final thing. Normally, nothing is going to go wrong in the QDR. Some of the CDR, that's quite difficult because you're still at the earlier stages. But again, you're going to have people present and who go and make some comments. These comments are very important, especially if it's the first time for you doing this. It's a great exercise of analyzing your whole mission. They can be 4, 5, 6 hours long, even longer, depending on the size of your mission. You need to present everything from the different work packages you have, how you recruited the astronauts, how you selected the base, what kind of trainings have you done, what are the logistics, where do you get the money, what's your media communication plan, who are your advisors, etc., etc. You have to put everything in it. Everything needs to be thought of, and everything needs to be great. You shouldn't have a doubt. You should know why you did it, how you did it, and what it's going to lead to. Okay, and this also shows how serious you are about your work, and it's fantastic really for your mind to make sure that you've understood everything and that you're not missing some points. So yeah, and obviously the last thing is to enjoy doing it. Obviously it's a huge amount of work doing those missions, but it's totally worth it, and it's a very good exercise. And I cannot stress enough also how important it is to find people who will be hardworking but also extremely motivated and keen on doing that kind of experiences. Some people can spend 40 hours per week while working side jobs working on these, and it makes it totally worth it. Other people might not be as motivated. Make sure that you find those people early and give them a task that is maybe less critical, or provide them with the proper training so they can be efficient about it. Okay, do not wait too much to only find half motivated people. Make sure that you get the right team for it, which is why make sure you've got your idea in your mind. Really just think that you've got your mission. Okay, I want to do this, I want to do that with that crew, with that habitat, so that I can do those EVS, so that I can do those experiments. Make sure you've got your plan already quite clear in your head, you know, and then start inspiring people, start finding more ideas, make it a bit more concrete, and then you get your folder ready, you contact your people, you get your team, and you get your mission started. Okay, so make sure you know what you want. So ready, set, go, and good luck.